weeks of cold. This is not quite a performance, but just a small piece of text, which perhaps makes a change as well. So it's called N-1. N-1, N is multiplicity, and 1 is a singularity. It has neither beginning nor end, but always a middle, from which it grows and which it overspills. It constitutes linear multiplicities with n dimensions, having neither subject nor object, which can be laid out on a plane of consistency, and from which the one is always subtracted. When a multiplicity of this kind changes dimension, it necessarily changes in nature as well, and undergoes a metamorphosis. So n multiplicity minus 1 is what we encounter, for example, on the squares of protest from Tahrir, Gezi, Omonia, from the relation between the multiplicity that is inhabiting us and the singular that we are extracting from it. And I will start to show you an excerpt of a video of mine that was done quite some time ago already. Just in the middle of this video, where we see the Japanese Buto dancer Min Tanaka dancing in the psychiatric clinic of Laborde. I will just have a few seconds of that, and then we will see an anthropologist from Brazil, whose name is Viveros de Castro, who actually thinks about these relations between multiplicity and singularity, but from a different perspective, from the south of the world. And we will also hear a few words of how psychoanalysis has colonized the world by our friend Felix Guattari. And I will start to kind of give a few notes that I have written on this work, but specifically on the kind of coming and going from the beginning of anthropology to colonization, back to theory, back to decolonization of thought, and that's about it.
Là où il faut cette logique partie, cette appréhension non discursive, on a un rapport avec autre chose. Et à mon avis, il y a ces objets mentaux dont tu parles, et tu dis que en partie Freud les a découverts, mais les a immédiatement fermés, en criant le bien, et plus tard, tout cela a été soumis, disons, à la structurelle, donc tout ça, il faut le relibérer. Et quand ça se libère, c'est vrai que ça fait une espèce de confusion indomptable, parce que ça prolifère partout, et ça peuple autre monde. Je crois que ça crée d'autres mondes possibles.
Et Guattari aussi. Et à Guattari aussi, c'est que la première chose à faire, c'est de couper le lien entre le sujet et l'humain. Donc la subjectivité n'est pas synonyme de l'humanité. Le sujet, c'est une chose, l'humain, c'est une autre. Le sujet, c'est une fonction objective qu'en fait on trouve déposée sur la surface de toutes les choses. Ce n'est pas un type d'objet spécial. Voilà. sujet, enfin, tout est là. Donc, le sujet, c'est une façon de décrire, en fait, l'action des choses, l'action de... En fait, c'est ça pour les Indiens, ça, sans doute, je ne sais pas pour Guattari, mais le sujet, c'est une façon de décrire le comportement des choses. Exactement comme pour nous, objet, c'est une façon de décrire, au sens que pour nous, la science s'imagine comme étant, arrivant en état scientifique, quand elle est capable de pomper, de vider le monde de toute intentionnalité. Une description scientifique du monde au sens moderne, vulgaire du terme, c'est un monde où tout est décrivable en termes d'interaction matérielle entre deux particules, disons. Pour les Indiens, c'est exactement le contraire. La question, c'est toujours qui, et jamais quoi, qui. Parce qu'il y a des choses qui n'arrivent que ne soient pas liées à une intention. En général, une très mauvaise intention. C'est-à-dire que c'est la théorie du soupçon, mais portée en grandeur qui est beaucoup plus grande que celle des Nietzsche ou des Bourdieu, si vous voulez. Et dans ce sens, oui, c'est le sujet. L'idée, c'est d'abord qu'il y a plus de sujets que des humains. Ensuite, que les sujets par essence multiples. La subjectivité, c'est une fonction de multiplicité, non pas d'unité. Ce n'est pas une unité de la conscience, ce n'est pas une fonction d'intégration, mais au contraire, c'est une fonction de dispersion. La subjectivité n'est pas la synthèse transcendantale, mais au contraire, c'est la synthèse disjonctive, pour parler comme les autres. Et pour moi, c'est ça l'animisme. C'est un monde qui est foncièrement anti-monothéiste et tout ce qui va avec les monothéismes, c'est-à-dire le mono-anthropisme, le mono-subjectivisme, l'idée que le un soit la forme que l'être doit assumer pour se faire chair, quoi.
La psychanalyse freudienne, mais aussi la psychanalyse lacanienne, c'est-à-dire le structuralisme psychanalytique, axe tout du langage, ont en quelque sorte pris en charge tous les phénomènes qui échappaient à la compréhension de la psychologie classique, de la psychologie classique. Donc, ils se sont portés à la découverte de ce qu'on a appelé un nouveau continent de la psychologie. Seulement, au lieu d'explorer ce nouveau continent, ils se sont comportés un peu comme les explorateurs au XVIIIe siècle, au XIXe siècle, maintenant, la grande période coloniale. Ils ne se sont pas intéressés à ce qui se passait vraiment dans le continent africain ou dans le continent américain. Et ils ont surtout porté leurs efforts pour comprendre suffisamment de choses et pour adapter les populations aux modes dominants européens, au capitalisme européen. Et dans les psychanalystes, ils ont fait la même chose. Ils se sont intéressés aux rêves, aux lapsus, aux actes manqués, à la psychose, à la psychologie enfantine, aux mythes, etc. Et pas pour comprendre, approfondir les logiques spécifiques de ces domaines, mais pour les ramener à la compréhension dominante au mode de vie dominant, c'est-à-dire celui où il y a un certain type de rapport entre les femmes, un certain type de triangulation familiale, un certain type d'interprétation de la réalité. Voilà mon reproche, c'est que la psychanalyse s'est comportée comme une sorte de puissance coloniale par rapport à l'inconscient, qui est quelque chose qui échappe justement aux réalités qui sont les nôtres dans une société développée.
The new continent of subjectivity, the division between inside, outside, the self, the other inhabits our modern imagination, our gaze, and produces our individuated bodies and the relation between them that are formed by the capturing machines of capitalism. What articulates the psychic division between body, memory, and the mind, as Gayatri claims, was instituted by Freud and subjected to a form of colonization. Institutional psychotherapy, on the other side, which is represented by all these experiments in Laborde and other clinics, can be seen as a form of resistance against these colonial powers embedded in psychoanalysis, but from which the colonial system, and from the colonial system. There is a few examples that we would need to explain. I don't explain them and name them. It's the Clinic of Saint-Alban in Laborde. They were practices of building zones. One could say a terrain, a terreno, for a politics of experimentation. And it is where we can ask how experimentation engages politics. The psychiatric clinic of Laborde was a polyphonic laboratory, as Peter Belbart just said in the film. So, in other words, if we can create new alliances, new group subjects, and thus new existential territories, we must not hold on the myths of the dramatic singularization that inhabit the Freudian model of the psyche. Even after Deleuze and Guattari, major philosophical clearings of Freud's psychoanalysis in Anti-Oedipus, from its inability to imagine other types of relationships and group subjectivities outside of the mono subject, as Castro was just referring to, Guattari continued to insist that it is impossible to advance much further with the mysterious references that, for example, were given in Totem and Taboo to the myths and with the Oedipal triangulation, because they do not allow us to render the singularity of a processual itineration. By that, subjectivity might be susceptible for a reconstruction of existential territories. And I quote, "How can a mode of thought, a capacity to apprehend, be modified when the surrounding world itself is in the throes of change? How are the representations of an exterior world changed when it is itself in the process of changing? The Freudian unconscious is inseparable from a society attached to its past traditions and subjective invariance." Guattari claimed that the possible resistance does not reside in an individual body, but rather within a zone of collective production of subjectivity. He predicted the emergence of these resistances in the geographies of the South, where the post-colonial systems are retreating. The examples of Candomblé and Capoeira in the history of the terreiros and the free zone in Brazil, where African slaves could escape from the colonial oppressors, became an important example of the anti-colonial resistance in Brazil, in that animist practice is based. The reappropriation of heterogeneous cultural elements which occur in these phenomena, such as Candomblé, is usually treated as belonging to a separate cultural identity that would be possibly saved. However, in all likelihood, this practice has, on the contrary, the creative nature of invention of a kind of religion in a very modernist context. Moreover, this seems to be characteristic of the situation in Latin America in general. It has not been completely devastated by capitalist semiotics and has extraordinary reserves of means of expression that are not logocentric and can organize themselves in creative forms in a different way. Viveros de Castro sees anthropology as a theory of permanent decolonization, a permanent decolonization of thought. For many years he lived and studied the Aravete in the Tupi-Guarani people of eastern Amazonia. he positions the cosmologies of the Araveta in his book From the Enemy's Point of View and Cannibal Metaphysics as a society where a difference between interior and exterior is inappropriate. And he refers to a conception of subjectivity as a completely materialist conception, even permitting a renewal of materialism. In his introduction to metaphysical cannibalism, Viveros de Castro introduces the idea of multinaturalism in order to reverse the ideas of perspectivism. Now, what is perspectivism? It's coming from Levi-Strauss. It has perspectivism useful for a critical approach capable of retrospectively understanding the taxonomies and hierarchies of modern European anthropology, which produce the exotization of the other. For Levi-Strauss, the perspective of the other doesn't involve the flip side of the same, inserted into anthropological science by indigenous cosmologies. So the other of the other is including a form of diversification. It belongs qualitatively to another cosmological space-time. The always other becoming, other introduces a difference. For Castro, the time, thought, and body of animist cosmologies are not only in an inverse relation with the subject-object organization of European anthropology, but they are rather in relation of multiplicity that originates in the interconnection of perspectives between colonial European sciences and the other natural science of indigenous cultures produced by colonialism. In that quote, couldn't one shift to a perspective showing that the source of the most interesting concepts, problems, entities, and agents introduced into thought by anthropological theory is in the imaginative powers of the societies, or better, the peoples and collectives that they propose to explain. So this is like the point. That means like what we kind of can capture in this 20th century anthropological, like in critical anthropological research, is being given to us by the imaginative powers of the societies that were studied. So it's a kind of inscription which comes within this contact. The philosophies of Deleuze-Guattari from 1000 Plateaus create the foundation of this inverse multiplicity, an appropriate machine for retransmitting the sonar frequency that I picked up from Amerindian thought, Castro says. His argumentation in Cannibal Metaphysics shows that the tendency of ethnography and anthropology is in this work of Emile Plateau. Indeed, he characterizes the work as a becoming Indian of Deleuze and Guattari's thought. However, it's first of all it's the conceptual tools, which are the rhizome, alliance, multiplicity, disjunctive synthesis becoming indiscernible, and ultimately the reliance into Levi-Strauss' anthropological concepts of perspectivism that must lead us out of the symptomatic ambiguity through which the misconceptions of anthropology must be cleared up. While the Europeans relied on the social sciences in their investigations of the humanity of the other, the so-called Indians placed their faith in the natural sciences, and where the former proclaimed the Indians to be animals, the latter were content to suspect the others might be gods. Both attitudes show equal ignorance, Levi-Strauss concluded, but the Amerindian behavior certainly has a greater dignity. If this is really how things transpired, it forces us to conclude, despite being just as ignorant on the subject of the other of the other was not exactly the same as the other of the same. I'm not sure, do I have still time to continue? Yes. So Castro transposes this concept of the rhizome in which multiplicity creates a field of intensification or intensive differences through multivalent relations through the internal reversible dynamics of direction to the cosmologies of the Aravite. He proposes that this allows us to abandon the reductive structural procedure of an analysis refers to the identification method or the synchronization of a symptom in order to arrive at an animist thinking with Amerindian cosmologies, which, as Deleuze-Guattari proposes, likewise always creates new differences. This lively, even more producing difference is created from the internal dynamics of between the poles that act within the rhizome through relational proportions. It is no longer the analog identification and comparison that comprise the rhizome, but rather the becoming, originating through the nature of their multiplicity, the dynamics of becoming that are in a continuous exchange. The rhizome is plane of an intensified agency through multiplicity, such as the possibility to build alliances in a pack or to determine distances between each other in a group. Building alliances instead of ancestry. If the theory of filiation groups had for its archetype the ideas of substance and identity, and the theory of marriage alliances was opposition and integration, the perspective offered here draws some elements for a theory of kinship, but difference and multiplicity, or a relation of disjunctive inclusion. So, for Castro, perspectivism and multinaturalism is evident in the model of the Amerindian Aravite and the social organization, in which different entities of being have different body eyes in one and the same world. Every perspective is seen through different body eyes, recognizing a similar motivation but from different positions of interest. The intersection of these perspectives seen with different body eyes is where shamanism acts. Amerindian shamanism could be defined as the authorization of certain individuals to cross the corporal barriers between species, adopt an exospecific subjective perspective, and administer the relations between those species and humans. So, in the horizontal, so-called horizontal model of shamanism and perspectivism and multinaturalism of the Aravite, all living beings are understood through their corporal difference in a world where all are unified on the plane of one visual thinking. Vision is a model of knowledge production here. Shamanism is entirely based on that, about the invisible, about seeing things from the other side. In their cosmologies, each species has eyes. What differentiates each species from each other depends on the type of eyes that they have. Okay, so I think probably this is what I wanted to give in for the input today here. First of all, understanding that many of these kind of descriptions have taken place in terms of every time we think that these subject-object machines have actually achieved to get some sort of a taxonomy or a system or a science. There is an inscription that probably has happened without, without being very obvious in the beginning. So the control didn't really take place. Or on the other side, maybe something was given into this, was narrated, was given into this study that is somehow developing. And if you see this in the history in terms of anthropology and Melitopoulos and Castro, then Castro claims at least that these imaginative powers are now at work here a little bit later, but they are now working out here. So there is this kind of inscribing logics and ever ongoing diversifications that cannot be understood through systems of identification or systems where we think subjects in terms of human individuated bodies. Well, thank you very much.